He slammed onto the ground, his eyes wide with horror, knowing that if he didn't act fast, she would die. He shouted right away that they would save her, and they hurried straight down the cliff to reach Huangzai. He held her in his arms. The rest of the primitives stood like a mountain before them. He told her to rest, saying they would rescue her. A huge herd of angry bulls blocked their way. The primitives were clueless and waited for orders from their king. Right now, a whole herd was approaching them, ready to kill. The boss ordered the crowd to disperse. Our protagonist suspected the leader had caught on to his trap. He never realized how intelligent he actually was. Sheik from above ordered everyone to arm themselves immediately and defend the king. The main character immediately shouted, telling them to hold off for now. He then said they must be ready to kill anyone who comes to them first. But the bulls did not wait for our heroes to regain composure, and they immediately launched a ferocious attack. Suddenly, a man materialized in front of our main character, who also threw a spear of poison with incredible force. Toward one of the bulls, a boss leapt out from behind him. He activated his battle axe and charged to strike. With a single motion, he sliced off the attacker's head. When another bull charged, Xing stepped in to save his boss. The rest of the primitives were also in the thick of a battle. They swung their spears with great force, then hurled them, though some fell short. The bulls defended themselves, and the clash continued, with the scent of blood rising. Screams rang out in every direction, and the air was thick with tension. Their bodies glistened with sweat, and a few of the primitives had already charged into combat bare-fisted. Sheik shouted his commands from above. While they kept attacking, they were buying time for their comrades to retreat. But the herd would not back down. Their fury knew no limits. After a while, our heroes successfully pushed back the animals' first wave of attacks. The next ones followed, their gaze lingering as if studying our heroes. Suddenly, a roar thundered, and every monster turned to look, as if listening. Then they began to pull back, taking slow, deliberate steps that felt like a retreat. Had they just received orders to retreat, the protagonist wondered. Staring into the distance with a serious expression, he felt the massive monster had finally decided to confront them directly. Tension climbed, rain started to fall, our heroes readied themselves for battle. A colossal animal stood before them, and it was a real monster. This monster was the king of bulls. As it drew in a deep breath, a strange aura began to rise around it. The king of the primevals realized that a powerful attack was about to strike. He shouted for everyone to run. At that very moment, the monster unleashed a powerful attack from its mouth. Her strike made the wall collapse even further. He was aiming at the primitives perched on the mountain. The blast faded, and a road opened in the mountain. Seeing his subordinates, the protagonist realized the monster had terrified all of them, erasing their fighting spirit. He ordered everyone to head north while he distracted him, and the others from above had to wait for his signal before striking. Glancing at the monster, his teeth clenched, he told him he was against him. He immediately rushed straight at our hero, ready to strike. The king would not just stand there and wait for his death. He rose to his feet and rushed toward the bull. Their blows met, throwing up a cloud of dust, and a shockwave surged from the impact. None of them were going to retreat. Each wanted to kill the others, but the monster was stronger than our hero, who hurled it aside and then crushed the earth beneath you. He darted straight toward the fleeing man, ready to deliver the final blow. The future emperor's gaze drifted toward the mountain. He saw his chance to save himself. He realized that if he could stand up, the battle's outcome could still change. He had only a short time left to rise. He was about to open his mouth and issue a command to Sheik. Suddenly, the Bull King struck with a mighty blow. The impact rattled the entire wall, and a powerful explosion followed. Everyone began screaming, as their king was under direct attack. The woman began to blame herself, realizing that if it hadn't been for her, everything would have turned out differently. At that moment, the monster moved to the remaining primitives, determined to finish them off. The monster loomed before the heroes. Its sight frightened them, yet each knew they could not retreat under any circumstances. Suddenly, one of them shouted that they needed to get ready for the toughest battle. The bald man warned that they'd kill her right then and there. They must avenge their king. Suddenly, a flash streaked past the king of the bulls. His eye was wounded, and blood began to flow. The bull couldn't understand where the attack had come from or who could have struck him. Suddenly, a shadow fell, blessing the bull, and because of it the gorge appeared. It was our main character who added to his words, mentioning the gorge, noting that at the critical moment. He managed to hide in it, but still suffered serious injuries. His body shivered, its wounds scattered across him. Everyone started shouting, and those screams were joyful. They couldn't believe their eyes. Their king was alive and standing beside them. At that instant, the king turned to Shig, who replied that he was glad to see the king alive and unharmed, and that he was eager to receive orders. Without hesitation, our hero barreled toward the gigantic bull, shouting that they must kill it. Everyone hurried toward the bull, obeying their king's orders. Everyone was resolved to kill the monster, and one of them stepped forward first. He leapt, determined to strike the monster straight in the head, yet the creature wouldn't stay still and let him land the blow. Using her horn, she struck the attacker, plunging it straight into his body. He screamed in pain, yet he refused to let the bull go. The bull king roared in anger, and with all his might, tried to fling the man off. Suddenly, he thrust his huge hand toward one of the people who were trying to grab him. Having snatched him, he was ready to crush him, but the protagonist wouldn't let it happen. He immediately struck the animal right in the face, thereby freeing his comrades, yet the bull would not let them go so easily. He opened his mouth, gathering energy. A few seconds later, a deadly attack burst from it, targeting our protagonist, but he managed to dodge. The strike nearly hit one of the king's allies. She screamed in terror, because just a little more and the attack would overtake her. But at that point, our main character had already swung directly at the monster's head. He was about to end him with a single blow. Striking with all his might, the monster let out a wheeze, then its mouth shut. The assault halted, but our hero wouldn't relent. With the last strike missing him, he launched another attack, slicing into his skin. The monster screamed in pain, and blood burst in all directions. When he fell, the king told Shig this was their chance to strike the bull king. Shig instantly ordered everyone to target the wound. This was their final chance, and the comrades above them. He instantly began hurling spears at the monster, and almost everyone struck the bull's wound. His roar swelled louder, and the wound began to gush more profusely. At that very moment, he darted to the side, clearly attempting to dodge the attackers. Suddenly, he dropped to the ground, throwing a cloud of thick dust around him. Everyone stared in surprise as a fog began to rise. Their bodies shook with pain and exhaustion, and the tension hung heavy in the air. They wondered if they had won, eyes wide in disbelief. After all, they just performed a miracle. Suddenly, Shig shouted triumphantly, and everyone burst into joyous cheers. Our heroes stood right in front of the monster's head. The bull's eyes were closed, and screams rang out all around, a tribute that was all thanks to their king. Bleeding, the hero's face tightened, because it seemed that everything had gone off course. After all, the bull standing right in front of him seemed to be waiting for something. He couldn't understand why they kept standing there, merely watching. Suddenly, the bull king began to rise. His breathing grew even heavier than before. Tension hung in the air, felt by everyone around. As he looked at the scene, the hero thought it was downright awful. They'd be powerless to defeat him, and just a second later, a lightning-fast strike caught the hero, sending him flying. Afterward, the monster immediately turned to attack the rest of the people. Just a moment later, they had all been scattered in every direction. His gaze drifted around the room, his eyes crazier than before. The bull wouldn't stay still. Instantly gathering energy in his mouth, he unleashed a powerful volley at the crowd. Bleeding profusely, the king's breath strained as his body reached its limits. Sitting on the ground, he pondered how to fix the situation, knowing that his mistake could let them all die. Standing on his feet, he felt he could barely keep his balance. His body refused to obey him, yet he wasn't ready to die here. At that instant, the monster was dislodging the spears that had pierced it. Pulling one out, he tossed it at the main character. The spear streaked through the air at a dizzying speed, and our hero knew he couldn't possibly dodge it. Was this truly death? Suddenly, a massive, looming shadow of a woman rushed past him. It was Lee's yellow-haired friend, and she seized the spear herself. It sliced right through her body, and the protagonist's face went dark. He realized it was all his fault, yet he couldn't tell where the plan had gone awry. His thoughts swirled in his mind as a dying comrade lay before him, yet he could do nothing. He was filled with anger. He rose, recalling all the wonderful moments he'd shared with his girlfriend. He was enjoying his time with her, but the anger in him swelled steadily. Standing right in front of the enormous monster, he stared straight into its eyes. Its body began to glow, bathed in a luminous aura. The protagonist was swelled with hatred. He screamed that he would kill it. He was set on slaying the monster. The system began sounding alarms about the emergence of an unstoppable force. Yet the hero dismissed the system. His thoughts were occupied solely by murder. Summoning every ounce of strength into his axe, he swung it straight at the bull king. The blow sliced all the way through, cutting straight into the ground. The body was split in two, and the bull screamed in agony. The screams echoed across hundreds of kilometers, heard by all nearby. The screams abruptly faded. Blood spilled around, staining the ground a deep red. The hero met the monster's eyes with a furious stare. It didn't satisfy him. He wanted to kill everyone else. Standing before the remaining herd, he shouted, "Fall!" He intended to kill them all. Their faces shifted, turning frightened as their king died. Gasping for breath, the hero screamed and raged, vowing to kill them. He ordered the attack. Suddenly, one of the bulls screamed. Fear showed itself in his movement, and their hues shifted from scarlet to blue. And immediately, they hurried to the side, running as fast as they could into the thicket of the forest. Our hero's strength finally slipped away, leaving him unable to hold his axe. He fell to the ground, leaning against it. He wondered how he could keep from falling. But a system window popped up right before him. He was warned that he was dying. After that, blood began to spurt from his mouth with every cough and never stopped. He fell to his knees, his eyes beginning to close. Anxious cries rang around him. Those same cries had pulled him in, searching for his comrades. He saw them, his eyes closing tighter and tighter. The system warning grew louder and louder. The screams around him quieted, and the light began to dim. Remembering the girl, he glanced toward her to see if she was alive, but nothing was visible. Suddenly, the light faded, and silence and darkness took over. Opening his eyes, he saw magnificent shapes and felt warmth all around. She opened her eyes and turned to him, smiling. The girl was glad to see the king awake. The king lay on Ayu's lap, and she anxiously stroked his head, asking if everything was okay. Our hero immediately asked her if they were truly in a pigsty. But there, smiling, she replied that this was not a true belief. She told him that once the bulls were driven out, they moved to a new land. They built a hut just for him and told him to lie down alone for now. She was about to inform the others that he had woken up. But our hero immediately told her to stop. He was keen on what was happening with Dada and Liu Tang. The girl said that when they found Liu Tang, he was barely breathing, yet he quickly recovered. And when he finally arrived, he had been standing outside, guarding the king all this time. Ah, yes, she's even more injured. She took a magic medicine, so she now needs to rest, but the rest will recover fine. She later noted that within 4 days, everyone had slipped back into normalcy and resumed their everyday routines. The king was stunned to realize he'd slept for a full 4 days. Opening the system window, he saw that 11 days remained until the quest ended. He realized time was running out, so he couldn't afford to waste a single second. At that moment, the giggling girl thought the king was odd because he had been staring at the same point for so long. As he tried to get up, pain surged through his body and every part ached. At that moment, his subordinate told him the king should rest. Because he had not yet fully recovered, he answered with a menacing face. That was no time for rest. He ordered Shiga to be summoned. He commanded her to tell him only that he had woken up. She stood up and vowed to handle everything from then on. As she walked out, she tried not to notice the people standing there too. The moment she left, the hero realized he had lost all his fighting power and strength. If everyone became aware of this, it wouldn't be easy. He was happy to see the tribe learn to move on their own. They had to build a fence immediately and then turn it into a wooden wall. Suddenly, his thoughts were cut off by the news that Shiga had arrived, and he ordered him to speak outside. He immediately said he was very glad that everything was all right with his king. Our main character said he had a special assignment waiting for Shig. He told him to move closer to the walls and to take in everything he was about to hear. He leaned in, assuring us he would handle everything in the best possible way. A few minutes later, he turned around, beaming, and shouted that he would definitely do everything. He started to depart. The hero realized he could no longer afford mistakes. While hunting bulls, he had to clear the area. Afterward, he turned straight to Liu Tong and informed him that a special task awaited him as well. He ordered him to hunt the bull king and bring back its skull and skin. Brandishing the axe, he made his subordinate beam with joy, for he regarded the weapon as divine. Trembling with joy as he left, he shouted that he would surely finish the task. The girl approached the doorway and urged the king to rest, but he cut her off and declined immediately. He told her there was a special task for her too. After a few seconds, he said that if nobody was around, she could come to him alone. When she stepped inside, she heard the king explain he had sent them away deliberately to hand her a secret mission. She quickly stripped off her clothes, declaring she had been ready for a long time. The embarrassed heroine began shouting she'd misunderstood him, then ordered her to get dressed. She sat sheepily before the king, awaiting his orders. He explained that he needed her to help him stage a play. She couldn't figure out which performance was being discussed. She asked what exactly was expected of her. The king replied he would send someone to negotiate with the Coconut Grove tribe. The main goal of this mission was to convince them to join us. She replied that, with more people on their side, they were unlikely to accept those conditions. But our hero said they needed to prove their strength. They must believe that joining is the only choice they have. He said he chose her for 2 reasons. First, because they came from a matriarchal tribe. It would make communication easier for women. And secondly, only she knows the king's current state. Our hero said the explosion had caused severe damage, though the medicine halted the decline. But to fully recover, something better is required. She still sheepishly agreed with her king, then asked him again if she should look scary to intimidate the Coconut Grove tribe. But she immediately replied that she understood everything and wouldn't let him down. The 2 heroes set out, each unaware of what awaited them on the other side. But they wanted to be useful to their king. The child said they'd be arriving soon. And he added that the Coconut Grove tribe does not like war. Yet he also concluded that fighting them should be avoided, since even though they're all women, their strength is formidable. But his companion reassured him, telling him that his job was only to show where the tribe was, while she would handle the negotiations. The boy also told her that the king was too indulgent, having made such splendid clothes, especially for her. After a while, sounds started to come from the bushes. The leaves rustled loudly, and then our heroes burst out from behind the foliage. As they looked out, surprise painted their faces. A beautiful sight unfolded before them. A group of women was bathing, and their joyous cries rang out. But there were also insults, and a green-haired woman was among them. She was the tribe's queen, and the boy's companion immediately took notice of her beauty. But he cut her off right away, stopping her from finishing, and claimed that appearances can be deceiving. He heard she'd eaten several suitors. While they bickered about devouring the grooms, someone slipped up behind them. It was a tribal detachment, tasked with guarding the rest of the tribe. A little later, the heroes were brought before the queen. 2 armed women reported to their queen that the pair had been spying on them while they were taking water treatments. They also claimed to call themselves Pooh and were very demanding about meeting the queen. The child immediately started shouting that they were not just poop, but ambassadors of their tribe's king. The green-haired girl asked him again right away. She didn't know which ambassadors he was referring to. At that instant, the girl turned away, startled. After a brief pause, the queen decreed that the woman would remain a slave, while the man would be offered to the fish as a grim sacrifice. And the piece of meat was turned into dinner. A member of the Grove tribe immediately snatched the baby. She pulled him to the side, and he screamed at the top of his lungs, begging IU to save him. IU immediately dove into negotiations, remarking that she believed the Grove's queen to be quite perceptive. But she noticed something different, since they were about to hand out the mountain bull meat. She cracked her whip and ordered everyone to stop and fall silent. She flashed a smirk and asked again whether they really had mountain ox meat. She promptly answered affirmatively, stating that a herd of black bulls lived north of the river. After that, the queen frowned sharply and said they were not going to unite and fight the bulls. With a smile, the messenger simply told them to underestimate people. Standing before her, she said the bulls' lands had long since changed owner. Everyone in the Coconut Grove tribe instantly dove into a vigorous discussion of those words. They couldn't believe that people could defeat a herd of bulls. The queen, furious, rose from her throne, a whip clenched in her hands. She said they had almost been trampled. As she drew nearer, she admitted she understood what awaited her for telling a lie. But the king's messenger would not back down from what she said. She kept telling how the greatest bull, the king of bulls, was slain by its own king. If they didn't believe it, they could see for themselves. One woman protested right away, calling it a trap. But IU was determined not to give them any reason to doubt. She said the king was merciful, because if he wanted to, he could have killed them all himself. The kid immediately joined his comrade, saying they hadn't come to fight, but to share sincere thoughts. IU immediately said that if the queen was afraid to go herself, she could send a tribal member with meat to secure their goodwill. The queen slammed her whip into the ground and turned to stare down at the people. She threatened them to make sure they never even considered cheating on her. Some time ago, the sun was already setting. Together with the Coconut Grove tribe, our heroes were on their way to the king. Suddenly, the little boy shouted that they had returned. Shagu immediately shouted, telling him to stop yelling and to help build a house, then guided him to where the king was waiting. One of the queen's companions decided to ask her what the phrase, "build a house," really meant. She heard it for the first time, but in that very instant, IU announced that they had arrived. The protagonist perched on a throne inside a hut, glaring menacingly at the guests. He displayed his power, and the queen instantly felt a murderous aura, making her wary. After all, the guy sitting in front of her looked like a massive beast that terrified her. With a menacing look, the protagonist thanked Aya for her work at that moment. The queen kept standing, her eyes darting fearfully toward the hut. The queen's allies scanned the surroundings, while the rest of the wounded tribe slipped back into their homes. They discussed the king's order to hide all the wounded so that nobody could see them. Turning to the queen, he asked if she was the sovereign of the Coconut Grove. One of the women called out, asking for the bull meat they'd been talking about. Gesturing to the side, the king of the people declared that everyone could take as much meat as they wished. Seeing the staggering number of slaughtered bulls, they were left mute, unable to fathom such a sight. As they neared the bodies, they watched people slice the flesh with axes. He gestured to the side and said their meat was there, and they'd have to cut it themselves. When they drew nearer, they still couldn't believe that it was all theirs. One of the girls pulled a wooden knife out and swung it with all her might. But when she slashed the bull's skin, her knife cracked and shattered in half. People laughed at them for not even being able to cut meat, and yet they were feared. The girls of the Grove tribe immediately began shouting that they were just lucky to have stumbled into the middle of a bullfight. They had nothing to laugh about. Rising with a grim look, the men asked whether they really wanted to fight, all the while giggling. Suddenly, something leapt out of the king's hut at lightning speed. At that same incredible speed, it darted past the swearing crowd. She turned and couldn't believe her eyes. She not only managed to see everything clearly, but then split the meat in half with the axe. Our senior subordinates were unhappy with the king's help, and the queen's aides feared that power. The queen turned to the king in surprise, asking what kind of weapon this was, since even their own arms couldn't scratch the skin. The main character immediately ordered that he use his axe to help cut up the meat. The girls were not fully satisfied with these actions, as their own girls were taller than the men, and the men had never offered any help. Glancing at the king, one of the men turned to him, claiming they were the first to provoke them, and asked why on earth they had done it. But before he could finish speaking, the king shouted that he was following his orders. Sitting on his throne, the pumped-up man started chopping the meat, his face showing clear dissatisfaction. He reiterated that he'd let them take as much meat as they could carry. He met the queen's gaze with an equally stern expression and stressed that their orders were absolute. Her voice quivered as she asked him how they could have defeated the herd of bulls. He replied that they could discover all of this, but it would depend on how their relationship continued to develop. After a moment, he said that was all. He told them to take the meat and leave. The woman standing before him saw him as a cold, indifferent pig. Our main character mused that without the bull skin bandage, the slaves would already have begun bleeding. A crimson stream traced his throne, and it was blood. The wounds began to bleed again as the body strained. In that instant, IU distracted the queen to the best of her ability, assuring her they'd deliver additional stone axes. She noted that while the king's weapon was far more powerful, these axes would suffice indeed for cutting meat. Yet when they left, the green-haired one said they refused. The weapon did not suit their grace. They halted and turned toward the king. She said they had powerful weapons, but chose not to show them. Having already moved far enough, she said she hoped she would not have to use that weapon against his tribe. She approached her subordinates and urged them to take whatever belonged to them, since they were leaving right away. Seeing them off, IU said that if the meat ran out, they could come back to take more. But the main point was that they didn't delay it, because they intended to share it with other tribes. She waved to the dimming flame, telling everyone she would wait for their return. After moving far enough, they paused. The queen asked her ladies whether they had managed to check everything. Suddenly, shadows appeared in front of her. One of the girls mentioned that they'd found some buildings. They're called houses, and grunting sounds were also heard coming from them. The green-haired girl was lost in thought, bewildered at how they could bestow such a fine house on pigs. The girl also noted that the tribe had mastered the divine power of fire. The queen could not believe those words, for they carried a divine power. But the girl insisted she'd seen the fire spring up out of nowhere, and then they roasted beef on it. When her words came out garbled, the queen asked her again, urging her to speak louder. She said the tribe had 10 members. All that remained were a handful of children and an old man. The queen, her face sour, asked why a full search hadn't been conducted. She justified her actions by noting that the houses in the area had been demolished, leaving no place to hide. She lifted her head and began to walk, breathing heavily. Suddenly she stopped, placing a hand on her waist. With a quick flick of her hand, she drew out the whip and straightened it. She struck her subordinates with forceful blows, injuring several. She warned that if they made excuses again, they wouldn't just receive a simple lash. They bowed, thanking her for sparing them from expulsion from the tribe. At that time, heavy noises were heard in the king's hut. Exhaling deeply, he surveyed his body. Ayu worried about her king's wounds, but he assured her everything was already back to normal. He thought the skin had strong regenerative power, capable of steadily healing his wounds. She was relieved that her great king was fine. A system notification floated above her head, announcing that she possessed eloquence. The main character considered this to be a rather rare talent. Feeling embarrassed, Ayu asked our hero if he loved her more. The king blushed more than the queen of the coconut grove. He then ordered her to tell every hidden person to come out and return to him, so that she could help heal his wounds as she drew closer. He also insisted that she remove his blood from the throne and forbade everyone from letting her approach him. With a grin, she turned toward the king, who asked why she was doing this. Later, the girl told him her king was truly handsome. The protagonist's face flushed even deeper, and he looked away. Suddenly, a boy burst in, running toward his master. He began to praise his king, noting that those people had indeed posted men around the camp. Our hero asked him how the assignment had turned out. The boy proudly claimed he had done everything in the best possible way. Everything they were meant to see turned out to be exactly what they shouldn't have. Naturally, they didn't, he answered the king. He exhaled heavily again, and a drop of sweat ran down his face. He praised the boy, saying he'd carried out everything at the highest level. Cheerfully sprinting away, he shouted that he was running to help Sheik build houses. Ayu, eyeing the working tribe, asked the main character whether the coconut grove actually wanted to join them. He replied that it was still too early. The plan was only half finished. When they arrive again, they'll start the plan's second phase. Lying in bed, our hero stared at the system window. Seeing the task, he thought there were 11 days left. And this time, it wouldn't be enough for him to recover. After ordering the system to open the warehouse, he suddenly noticed his battle axe had turned into a pangu axe. Seeing it, he could hardly believe his axe had turned into an artifact. He also couldn't fathom why he hadn't spotted it when handing it over to Liu Tong. After he called it into existence, it began to materialize in his hand. The system characterized the axe as a legendary weapon. The traits indicated that the weapon required a bloody sacrifice. The hero assumed that the stray blood he splashed on the axe had triggered a powerful skill. As the description implies, mastering this skill isn't easy. Our hero would end up with more than just a scar on his hand. As he kept thinking, he pushed to extremes and then let out a breath. When he raised the axe, he shouted that he had never expected his ordinary weapon to evolve. He also wondered if other weapons could share the same properties and abilities as his axe. He set the axe down beside him and realized that, in any case, the activation conditions were irregular. Everything hinges on fate. As he delved deeper into the system, he wondered what else was in his inventory. There was a healing potion, but it could only be used once. He believed he would kill anyone who didn't obey him. He also noted that the meat the girls had taken for 30 people would last about 2 days. Therefore, they must be back with them in just a few days. With time limited, Shang had to work hard. The king ordered Liu Tong to summon Shang because he had a secret mission for him. He immediately replied that he'd finished everything in record time. Soon enough, the two boys made their way to the king's hut. The boy shouted louder and louder, proclaiming how marvelous his king was. When he reached the hut's entrance, he knelt and announced that he had arrived. The king asked if he remembered the herd of black bulls they'd driven away. He said he remembered, and the king replied that he had 2 days to find them and report back. This was a vital mission. While fleeing, he shouted, urging the king to put his trust in him. Our main character, smiling, reflected on how, over the past few days, everyone had made a great contribution to their development. He also started to think that over these 2 days, he could prepare gifts for everyone to thank them for their work. During that moment, Shang was on the lookout for bulls, scouring every corner of what felt like the entire world. The king spent those 2 days preparing gifts. When he checked the system, it warned him that only 9 days were left in the quest. After arranging a few objects nearby, he said that was enough for today. He fashioned a stone arrowhead, earning him 1 extra point in technology. He also crafted a bone whistle and a drinking horn, earning an extra 2 points in technology. He was about to give the bone whistle to Shig, making it much easier for him to issue commands in battle or on a hunt. Stone tips can boost a spear's power, and the drinking horn will go to Shang. Suddenly, Ayu exclaimed that she had good news for the king. She, out of breath, told the king that their house was finished and handed him the cloak. She told him to put it on so he could hide his wounds. She helped him put it on. She was eager to aid her king. He thanked her back, and they stepped out of the hut, smiling. They were pleased with their work. Ayu shouted for everyone to step aside, for she had brought the king. Shig, spotting his king, extended his hand to the side and urged him to admire the magnificence. They built what they thought was a massive wooden house, its roof crowned with bull horns. Shig shouted that it was all his idea, then asked the main character how he was doing. The latter turned away and replied that he would go. Everyone around was shouting that the pigsty would truly suit the pigs, a new home that would keep them from sleeping in cold caves. Clutching the door, Shig also talked about how they did it, drawing from their king's stories. After positioning her in the house's center, he shouted that this was the end of their new home. At that exact moment, a system window popped up before the main character, informing him he'd earned 10 technology points for successfully building a wooden house. His face shifted as he reflected on how much his tribe had changed. From the moment he stepped in, he began to notice how the system was shaping his thoughts. Because just a short while ago, they were savage, blood-drinking creatures who howled like beasts. And their personalities and actions had changed entirely. Could this truly be accelerated evolution? The protagonist wondered. He turned to Ai and told her to report immediately when Hunter Seong arrived. As he left, he slipped his hand beneath the cloak and urged everyone to keep building houses, for many more would soon call this place home. Suddenly, screams tore through the silence. Someone had just uncovered something. Young stood before his king and told him he'd found a herd of black bulls, to which the king praised him. He placed a hand on his subordinate's shoulder, smiled, and spoke of finally being able to carry out the second part of his plan. Calling Shega over, he told him that a special task awaited him, too. He sat before his subordinates, explained his plan in detail, and they listened attentively. At the end, he turned to them and asked if they had any questions. Shegu turned to Shun and asked if they could do it. In reply, he calmly said he could finish the task. He extended his hand to Shegu, opened it, and told him to take this whistle for easier coordination of the order. Shegu was pleased with this gift. Still smiling, he turned to Young and said he had a gift for him too, so there was no need to worry. As long as he finished the task, he would receive his. The king added that he would act as soon as he gave the signal. They should jump straight into this task right now. Saying goodbye to those leaving, he realized how hard it was for them. Because of the manpower shortage, they had to assign work to the wounded. He walked over to the subordinate standing nearby and told him to build a fire. It was supposed to sit right in front of the house, but there was no need to light it yet. Ai asked her king whether this was for the guests who would soon arrive, and the hero answered affirmatively. After a while, people approached the hero's settlement. From the settlement's outskirts, the girl spotted them. She immediately sensed that the Coconut Grove tribe was approaching them. She rushed at once to the king's house to report their approach. She ran to the house and reported this to her king. Ayu was tending to the king's wounds, telling him they were healing, yet he was still forbidden to move. The king liked it, deeming it the most pleasant thing to be taken care of. He also began to imagine a future where he would subdue the Coconut Grove tribe. Suddenly, a knock on the door rang out, and a shout from behind her announced the arrival of the Coconut Grove tribe. Our cheerful hero declared that the fish had finally taken a bite. The first to appear was Ayu, who told them the queen of the Coconut Grove had grown even more beautiful since their last meeting. Stretching her hand toward the house, she told her to head into the royal palace. The king was already waiting for her. She looked at the building, taken aback. It's amazing that they managed to build a wooden house in such a short time. She couldn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, she turned to the girl beside her and said that the king was truly afraid to confront her. With a grin, she added that this time they'd bring even more meat, so as not to disturb their tribe. The whole Grove tribe stood behind her, and she said everyone was eager to meet such kind neighbors. Ayu replied that the king had already told them to get beef for 40 people, so they could head out to fetch it. Smiling and giggling, she remarked that the only snag was that there simply weren't 40 of them. The Grove's queen approached Ayu and asked if she'd like to join them, but Ayu replied that she had long been under her king's authority and thus declined. After a brief quarrel among the girls, Ayu finished speaking and explained that the king had ordered them to eat anything they couldn't carry with them on the spot. If cutting the meat proved difficult, their warriors could handle it for them. She turned away and said they would handle everything themselves. Suddenly, a booming voice from the house announced that she could come in. As the door opened slowly, a gentle creak could be heard, and excitement filled the air. She started to walk slowly into the building. As she stepped inside, she spotted the king seated, greeting the queen of the Coconut Grove. She shook her head in embarrassment, expressing how really grateful she was to him. She also mentioned that the royal palace looks normal. At that moment, our main character discovered she was drawn to construction technology. It intrigued her. With a grin, he told her it was just a temporary palace. The real building was still a work in progress. All of the residents would eventually settle there. She gripped his waist and asked whether he would truly allow everyone to live there. He answered that this was only temporary, and that, in time, everyone would live in stone houses. The girl instantly wrapped her weapon around her, aiming it at the king. He realized that with such a body, he would have no time to react. The queen surrounded him with her weapons, then, standing directly in front of him, pressed a foot against him. Our king was aghast that she was about to kill him. She told him to shut up, arching her back and smiling. With the knife pressed to her face, she declared that no one knows men better than she does. She knows how to get them to comply. Our king started to understand what was being said. He began to blush. She, blushing too, asked the king how he could understand that she had grabbed him. He wondered how to stay calm because it was so exciting. Instantly adopting a serious look, the king asked her whether she really thought he had avoided playing it safe. At that moment, he believed there was no plan. He was finished. In a one-on-one, that body left him with no chance. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Ayu announced that everything was ready. The banquet might begin, but an awkward image appeared before her, shocking everyone. The Grove Queen instantly unveiled the king. Our main character, laughing, said they'd already finished chatting and that everyone could head out to eat together. He asked his subordinate whether they'd lit a fire, and she replied that everything had already been done long ago. The queen was lost in thought, for every man in her tribe was a weakling. But he wasn't as weak as they thought. When they left the house, a large fire and a warm, welcoming atmosphere surrounded them. Her fellow tribeswomen began shouting, urging the queen to hurry, the meat would soon be cold. At that moment, the protagonist handed the salt to Ayu, hoping she would share a little with the coconut grove. She immediately showed them how to use it and explained its purpose. The queen of the grove began to appear, to which the girl replied that if she didn't want it, she didn't have to take it. All around, anyone who'd sprinkled salt on the meat was shouting. They were stunned by how drastically the flavor had changed. Standing and watching everything unfold, our protagonist wondered if he could just buy a little more time for Shig and Shun. After tasting the meat, the queen was delighted by the admiration of its flavor. At that moment, screams and the creaking of trees filled the forest. These were our main characters, hunting for bulls as they made their way through dense foliage. Noticing the herd, Comrade Shig asked if they really had no enough meat, since it seemed to him there was plenty to eat. He replied that they were not there to hunt. He then added that he'd understand everything later. Now he only had to follow his orders. Suddenly, a boy with a skin on his head, spotting the smoke, shouted that the king would signal it was time to act. Shig blew his new whistle right away, signaling the others. They instantly began hurling spears at the black bulls. Their hits were precise, and over that period, they markedly sharpened their throwing abilities and precision. The enraged bulls surged aside. Shig shouted for Sheng to brace himself as they were closing in. At that moment, Sheng perched on the tree, ready to strike, knowing it was his only chance. He spotted one of the largest bulls he was ready to attack. And then, leaping from the tree, he swung for a powerful blow, thrusting his spear straight into the black bull's back and making it scream in pain. Sheng shouted, "This bull is mine," and succeeded. The boy saddled the running bull right before the herd. He felt he could keep going, but his life might end right there. The charging bulls wrecked everything in their path, cutting down trees and tearing the earth. At that moment, Sheng could only think about how to cling on. He was trying to keep his fear from taking over. The bull thumped against the trees, hoping to fling the bug off his back. But Sheng blasted them as pathetic attempts, noting that even their king had fallen prey to them. At that moment, the other heroes watched all of this unfold. One of them was a boy with a skin on his head, and when he realized the herd was moving east, he knew something had to be done because their course was shifting. Shig, who was sitting nearby, said he had given a signal. He pressed the whistle to his lips and began to whistle. The whistle rang out everywhere, and the herd of bulls even took notice. Sheng couldn't believe they were heading the wrong way, yet he knew Shig wouldn't just drop the signal. Clutching the jutting spears, he tried to steer the bull back. The beast resisted, but the herd slowly slipped into the thick foliage, and their heart-rending cries began to fade. Joyful raptures echoed around the fire at that moment. The queen cried as she ate the meat, realizing that she was consuming so much. She'd certainly gained weight, yet she couldn't stop because it was so delicious. At that moment, our main character watched the unfolding events. Scanning his surroundings and watching birds lift into the sky, he realized his plan would soon materialize. No one around even suspected that all of this was part of a larger plan. A girl burst out of the trees, screaming. Her cries rang with terror. As we drew closer, everyone heard her call for help. Unaware of the hillocks, she stumbled and fell right at the feet of her queen. She shot a disdainful look her way and asked what had driven her to rush in so panicked. Tears streaming down her face, she recounted how a herd of furious bulls had burst into their territory and was running amok. And those who stayed in the camp were unable to resist them. The queen's gaze shifted. She couldn't believe what she heard and shouted to everyone. They were coming back, every minute counted, so they hurried. She couldn't understand how this could happen, since the bulls had never before entered their territory. At that moment, the bulls were wrecking everything around them. The girls from the Coconut Grove tribe lay motionless on the ground, unconscious. Those who made it up, the trees fired their weapons, trying to inflict at least a little harm on the animals. But the stones simply bounced off their thick skin. It was pointless. Seeing all this, they realized they had to save the sisters. They had to descend and engage in hand-to-hand combat. Leaping from the tree, they shouted they would die for their queen. But a heartbeat later, the bull ripped them apart, sending them flying in all directions. One of the girls fell right beside the swinging bull. She realized she wouldn't have time to dodge. She cried out, screaming she didn't want to die. A fist had already appeared in front of her face, and she was scrambling to shield herself with her hands. The sisters screamed when one of them was on the brink of death and rushed to her side. Suddenly, as she lay on the ground, she saw only a fist frozen right before her. She failed to see at first what had halted the powerful blow, thanks to the dust she raised. But as soon as the dust cleared, she saw the monster's hand in her queen's grasp. She, barely keeping the bull at bay, screamed that she would not let her people be maimed. With a swift wave, she hurled the furious beast skyward. When the bull crashed, it shattered the ground beneath it, an impact that marked the queen's most powerful blow. But her opponent merely exhaled and began to stand up. He accelerated, racing toward the queen to strike back at his attacker with astonishing speed. He intended to land a powerful blow on her, rushing past her. He pressed his powerful body against her, and the queen coughed in pain. She didn't have time to dodge fully. When she landed, they scooped her into their arms. Blood slicked her lips as she squinted in pain, struggling to grasp what was happening. Our protagonist asked the girl if everything was all right with her. After lifting her onto her feet, he told her tribe to rest. They would handle the rest on their own. The queen said she didn't understand why the herd had gone mad and attacked them. He glanced toward the bulls and began to shout. Standing face to face with the herd's leader, he asked it if it had forgotten what it had done. He started growling in his direction. The king was stunned that he didn't remember him because his plan was to scare them into fleeing. Suddenly, the lines on the bull's body began to shift from red to blue, gradually taking over. Yelling loudly, our hero realized he was scared. A cold sweat ran down his face. He pulled out an axe, aimed it at the bull, and shouted that he was lucky to have found the rest of the herd so quickly. Our king, grinning, felt it was truly unsettling that they had found a leader for themselves so quickly. But he was still far from his former self. When he saw that very axe, the bull began to shiver, and goose flesh rose across his body. Our protagonist kept shouting at the bulls. He said he'd long been eager to wipe out the remaining tribe. And in return, they stood still, taking in every word he said. The rest of our main heroes, fellow tribesmen, were not going to step aside. They surged into battle, torches blazing, ready to prove their superiority over the Coconut Grove tribe. Shig snatched a bull and shouted to Xiangnu. He abruptly let go and crossed his arms, while the boy sprang toward Shig. Stepping onto his big friend's hands, he pushed off. Soaring into the air, he landed squarely on the frightened animal's head. Grabbing the bull by its horns, Xiang caused the animal to squeal. Seeing all that, the king realized that his son was a natural at horse riding. The boy climbed onto the new king of the bulls, making him squirm from side to side. At that moment, the king ordered the queen to leave, but she refused. Because the herd still hadn't been driven off, she had to step into the battle. But the hero refused to let her go. He took her hand and pressed his proposal. He told her they couldn't handle these monsters because he'd taken only a few of us with him, and stepping into battle felt like heading for certain death. Standing, the girl could not object in any way. He also added that it would be better to send people to their own territories so that everyone could heal their wounds, after which they could calmly return home. He was ready to offer homes, food, and a guarantee of safety. The queen glanced around, spotting her wounded people. She understood that they could no longer keep fighting. During the king's address, Iu stepped in. She asked the queen whether she would prefer to let her subordinate die in vain. She stared menacingly to the side. Understanding everything instantly, she lifted her hand and shouted that the victims should stumble north. Gritting her teeth, one of the girls shouted even louder to say they were retreating. She began urging everyone onward, shouting that the wounded should be moved forward. Turning to IU, the king told her to bring everyone back to camp, while he stayed behind to buy time for a safe retreat. The queen passed by silently. IU warned her king to be careful. At that time, Shagu and the others faced the bulls in a fierce fight. Girls burst out from behind. One of them shouted, "Let's gather our courage and finally deal with these damned bulls." Shagu urged them to retreat with the others, but they chose not to heed his call. They hurried past him as if he hadn't spoken at all, and the king, smiling, told Shagu that those women were truly courageous. They couldn't fall behind. All our heroes rushed into battle. Loud cries began to fill the air, and as the sun set, a sorrowful silence settled all around. People emerged from the forest. One of the girls sprinted over to the walkers and asked where the king and the others were. IU replied that the king and the others stayed and added that many wounded had come with her. They all needed a good rest. She reached toward the houses and assured everyone that there would be enough for that number of people. The girl believed that it was all thanks to deity that they could build those houses so quickly. She also said that anyone unhurt could go and help bring food and water. IU carried the queen to one of the houses, telling her to rest. She added she would look after everyone else, so she wouldn't have to worry about them. She lowered her head and softly, almost inaudibly, said words of gratitude. After shutting the entrance to the queen's house, our heroine exhaled a long sigh. She was delighted that everything was going well. Entering the king's chambers, she found him slumped and weary on his bed. He told the girl that the heart of his plan was to conquer the coconut grove with the lowest possible cost. In the end, they only closed a hard battle, not the war. She felt joy and gratitude toward every god, for he was their king. He had entered their lives, and by the second day, everyone had already settled in. The girls began to do their own thing, while the men watched closely at that moment. Yes, I approached one of the night guards and asked if everything had gone well, and he replied everything was fine. One of the girls stood guard over the house of her queen. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her, and she wasn't aware of her surroundings. She thought it was just a cloud. When it turned toward her, she was frightened. She could hardly believe her eyes. Standing before her was a woman of immense proportions. Yes, she told her that their king had invited the queen of the coconut grove to his palace. It seemed to her that he was about to discuss something extremely important. Silence settled over the palace. The king stared at the system window, his focus completely on it. The screen displayed the number 8, the days remaining until the mission's end. Suddenly, a knock rang at the door, and he ordered the system window to vanish. I turned to the king and told him she had brought the queen. When we entered, the green-haired girl instantly nodded and explained that this was her answer to the tribes merging. But then her gaze darkened instantly, and she told him not to dream. I never imagined I'd be able to coerce her and take advantage of her weakness. When he rose and extended his hand, the king clarified that this was no coercion, but simply a profitable arrangement. He added that he could show them how to build houses, and also forge weapons and light a fire. In return, they'll be welcomed into his tribe. Approaching her and standing in front of her, he sternly demanded she accept his rules and protection. Leaning forward, he remarked that it was useless for some things. Relying solely on courage made the queen frightened. He asked her about the sea tribe's cruelty and couldn't believe she didn't know of their strength and ferocity. He persisted, likening her to a wounded deer doomed to die, and the queen screamed. She told him to stop. Turning away, she asked him to stop again. She told him it wasn't that simple. She could not make them accept a stranger's power unless a fight broke out, because only in battle does strength earn respect in their tribe. A smile crept onto our protagonist's lips as thoughts slipped through his mind. These were his thoughts on his victory. Once outside, the entire Coconut Grove tribe gathered at the hero's palace. He loudly declared that their queen was wounded, so she could not fight. To keep things fair, he won't fight at all. Consequently, Sheeg will step into the arena and fight on his behalf. Assuming the swagger of a victor, he laughed heartily and challenged anyone who'd dare to fight him. One of the girls stepped forward and vowed to fight him, and Sheeg recognized her as the same pigtail-haired girl he'd once faced the bulls with. Laughing, he warned her to be careful because he didn't want to hurt her, and she told him to shut up, saying he talked too much. After those words, he immediately rushed into battle. Swinging his massive axe, the pigtail girl vaulted into the air, evading the strike. She hurled her knife at the attacker, and Sheeg was baffled by the miniature blade darting toward him. Suddenly, he realized she was cheating, as the king stood right behind him. If he dodged, she would have struck him straight on, but as he deflected the knife, he shouted that it wasn't enough. He shouted that she shouldn't cheat. Suddenly, another blow struck his head, shattering the bone mask. In a fit of anger, he swung at her, shouting that the fight was over. Laughter erupted around her as she plopped down in an instant. At that instant, a spectator hurled another knife straight at Sheeg's head, and the girl with pigtails leapt over the man and ran to the side where the main character was standing. She shouted that she would never lose this fight, no matter what. They would not submit to that boor, and her eyes glowed with rage and hatred toward the man standing before her. She was about to kill him when a baby burst out from behind her on the palace roof. He hurled one of his spears at astonishing speed. He didn't even flinch. He trusted his subordinates' accuracy, speed, and strength completely. The spear pierced the girl with pigtails, splattering blood everywhere, and her face twisted with pain. The hit landed with pinpoint accuracy, and she tumbled to the ground. She collapsed, and everyone rushed to her screaming. Because she was one of the tribe's most vital fighters. All the girls of the Coconut Grove tribe brandished their knives. They were poised to launch the fight right then and there. They shouted that a trap had been set, and that they'd been lured here by a wicked plan. They kept shouting, pointing their weapons at our protagonist's tribe. They turned to their queen. They requested that she give them an order. When ordered to kill them all, the girls of the king's tribe slipped behind the fighters. Ayu looked at her king and asked him to issue the order as well. He watched the unfolding scene, baffled about whether it was the queen's order or a decision made on their own, since the murder wasn't part of his plan to spark a conflict. He threw a malicious glance toward the queen. He realized that the only way to escape was to take the Coconut Grove's queen hostage. Suddenly, the queen burst out, telling them to stop this farce. She screamed that they should never even consider deceiving her. After all, she wasn't going to use such vile tactics against their friends, nor was she going to uncover who devised the plan, just this fight. They lost the battle, a defeat steeped in shame, turning toward the king. She proclaimed that Ayu was the finest warrior of the Coconut Grove tribe. And if she hadn't thought about her, she would never have behaved so meanly. She also said she completely understands how powerful our hero is. His abilities are immense, even supernatural. She knelt on one knee, pleading for him to save her. Our king listened intently to her words, and her thoughts filled him. He realized that rescuing her would earn him the tribe's recognition. He was glad that the situation was back in his hands. He also realized he had only the last sip of the restorative potion. Extending his hand toward the queen with a smile, he assured her that he would, of course, save her. While lifting the queen, he also remarked that this is exactly what one does with friends. She thanked him. Her gratitude was boundless. When he approached the lying girl, he told everyone that, for the sake of the overall situation, he would let it go. But if it was just a minor punishment, he felt there was no need to take the medicine all the way. A small dose keeps her alive, the rest he uses to heal his wounds. As the potion took effect, the bleeding ceased. He ordered that she be sent to rest and assured she would wake up in a few days. Everyone was stunned, No one had ever seen such power before. They screamed with delight, shouting that the king had performed a miracle. At that moment, the king embraced the girl beside him and asked if they could now unite their tribes. She agreed, her head dropping in embarrassment, and the hero laughed loudly. He let her command his tribe, so long as she followed his orders. At that moment, the girl revealed she had one final request. Still embarrassed, she insisted the king should become her official partner. They must hold a grand ceremony to cement their bond. The king glanced her way, both pleased and embarrassed. Filthy thoughts swirled in his mind, as if a pie had been delivered straight to the house. They would have a wedding, exchange rings, and spend a truly unforgettable wedding night. They'll have a stunning daughter, and together they'll raise her, caring for her and shaping her into the strongest. Their daughter will wed a man equally powerful. He's her father. Together with the queen, they'll grow old. Ultimately, they'll die on the same day, and his last thoughts brought tears to his eyes. The queen couldn't fathom why he was weeping. Was he truly against having a wedding? Wrapping her in his arms, he kept saying over and over that, of course, he wanted to. And then, with a sweet voice, he said he hoped she would first recover fully. And during that time, he would have a chance to prepare for the ceremony. Facing the others, he shouted that they could disperse. And just a few days later, he invited everyone to the wedding ceremony. In that instant, a system pop-up flashed before the protagonist, announcing that he had officially founded his own tribe. He had to give it a name. A little later, he realized he was missing 4 people to finish the mission. He couldn't fathom why. He pressed a hand to his face and realized he first had to think of a name. While the queen stared at her future husband with a bewildered expression, the tribe was called the newcomer. The system congratulated him on establishing the newcomer tribe. He also considered it, as treachery began to invade his thoughts. He considered capturing several prisoners, but he wondered whether the nephews would be counted. At that moment, Aya withdrew the queen, assuring her she would soon get used to her king's condition. They were gossiping behind his back, claiming the king was too happy. Although he should feel utterly devastated, in the end, he'll find himself in the same situation as his earlier partners. The queen will slice him into pieces at the ceremony and eat him. He shivered at the words, and as the reality settled in, he pictured the bloodthirsty woman who would soon become his wife. He slipped into a wild panic, terrified for himself because he could never have imagined this outcome. He couldn't believe a girl of such beauty could eat people. He started to realize why their tribe was so small. Suddenly, a colossal shadow descended, stifling the stream of darkness. He turned and pleaded with her not to eat him. She said she wouldn't eat him because she loved him. After calming down, the main character asked her what was going on. She asked if he truly wanted to become a partner with that rude woman. Sighing heavily, he said he'd need to think hard about it again. But his interlocutor began speaking earnestly about the fact that she'd heard about a ceremony between the king and queen, yet our main character answered her. He answered too hastily. Yes, yes, she said, gripping her king and asking if that was true. While Ayu was watching, she couldn't quite follow the gist of the conversation. She leaned in and asked the girl why she'd run away. After all, she had been told to hide the wounded. She began to pull herself away from the king, declaring that she would keep him company. At that moment, our hero asked that he be set free.